Krishna, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 16 Days of Activism for Safer Families, brought to you by the ISKCON Vaishnavi Ministry. And today we're joined by Citi-Sakti Devi, who will be speaking to us on the topic of mutual respect, the heartbeat of safe families. So before we continue, Citi-Sakti, would you like to do the invocation prayers?
Sure, thank you. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagna Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Vishnu Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagna Lalita Shri Vishakambhitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namustate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriya Vanjakalpa Turubhishcha Kripa Sindhube Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai. Thank you. That was beautiful. Okay. So Citi-Sakti has an amazing bio. She has been practicing Krishna consciousness for over 25 years. She's a disciple of His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, and she currently lives in London, where she serves as a preacher, mentor, and leader. Some of the many services she has done are that, she served as a trustee and director at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and as a trustee for the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology in Washington. And she is also the co-founder of Mindspace, a confidential mental health space for devotees in the UK. Just some of her academic qualifications: she graduated from Imperial College as a medical doctor and specializes as a psychiatrist. She has been diagnosing and treating a wide range of mental health problems for over 20 years with medication, psychotherapy, nutrition, and Vedic teachings as an integrative model. She brings together over 2 decades of experience in scientific advances in mental health with Krishna consciousness, and connects with a diverse audience of celebrities, politicians, healthcare professionals, students, and corporate leaders. And she regularly broadcasts for BBC Radio on current affairs, mental health, well-being, spirituality, with over 200 million listeners, and presented her own show for over 3 years. She features on TV in a number of newspapers, magazines, and has contributed to several books. And I understand she's currently writing some books of her own right now as well. So,
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your immense wisdom and experience with us. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I'm grateful to be here, and thank you for having a platform which allows us to speak openly about difficult topics in a way that represents, what Srila Prabhupada gave to us and sacrificed so much of his life for. So thank you so much.
And thank you for joining. So, I mean, our overarching theme for this year's 16 Days campaign is safe families and strong communities. And obviously, there's a lot of facets to what that means. And, just to begin us, kind of set the tone or the stage for our conversation, I wanted to ask you a question. What does it mean to see your spouse as a Vaishnava? What is the ideal that Prabhupada wanted us to aspire to?
Mm. Srila Prabhupada, as the title of today's topic suggests, wanted to create a community of people who have mutual respect for each other in the service of Guru and Krishna. One of his final instructions was that your love for me will be shown by the way you cooperate with each other. Cooperation requires mutual respect. And Srila Prabhupada, like any guru, is also a disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So I'd really like to read out and share something from an article that, it's an excerpt from an article that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur wrote in The Harmonist called The Relationship Between Sexes. And I think, it's one of these excerpts that creates a very strong foundation that we can build really healthy relationships between Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis on. So I'll read this. He says, the cardinal principle of Grihastha ashram is that no one may be the owner of any property or service of another. Everyone is only a servant whose activities are ever in the service of the Lord. Similarly, the sole object of everyone's service as the only master, only friend, only son, and only consort is Krishna. Marrying and giving in marriage do not give rise to any rights of a master, either to the husband or to the wife. Men and women are joined in wedlock for the purpose of serving each other in the performance of the joint service of Krishna. The wife is not an object of enjoyment of the husband, nor vice versa. They do not marry for gratifying their sexual appetites. They marry for pleasing the Lord, not for pleasing themselves. They choose for their partners only such persons who serve God better than themselves. They offer themselves to be accepted by their partners for the favor of being allowed to share in their superior service of Hari. Neither the husband nor the wife should claim the services of his or her partner on their own account. Both of them are only to offer their services if and when their partner is pleased to permit them to share their service of Hari. None of them can force their partners to serve them. This system of household discipline has its roots in the joint worship of the household deity by all members of the household. The reason why the Guru does not ordinarily ask any person to enter the state of wedlock is that it is very rare to find anyone in this world who is willing to regard his or her wife or husband as worthy of his or her unconditional services. This is, however, exactly the only relationship between husband and wife that alone can be sanctioned by the Guru. Isn't that beautiful?
That is absolutely beautiful. And I do recall, I think, I can't remember the exact reference, but I remember, I think Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had said that the reason why he never, gave anyone the instruction to get married is because the service of being a spouse to a Vaishnava is requires a very high standard. I can't remember his exact words, so don't quote me exactly, but I think it was related to the excerpt that you've just read, that being a Vaishnava is a very high standard in itself. And especially, trying to, and the way we become Vaishnavas is by service to other Vaishnavas. And, being able to maintain this attitude of humility and respect, even in, because familiarity breeds contempt. So in our closest relationships, it can be very challenging to maintain this culture and this internal mood of I am the servant. And I'm just wondering, considering, obviously we do live in the world, and we bring in some, ISKCON is not completely insulated from the entire world. And there is sometimes a kind of an exchange of attitudes sometimes of things that may or may not be beneficial to our Krishna consciousness. And in terms of the standard of this expectation from our Guru Srila Prabhupada, our Guru Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, I was wondering if we could get into some of the things that are not so helpful, that we may misunderstand, that can distract from this ideal that we're aspiring to.
Sure, go for it.
Yes. And okay, so I mean, I know, all right, the concept of narcissism it's a hot topic, and it's something that's kind of everywhere. Everyone's talking about narcissism, and there's also this conception of overdiagnosis or misdiagnosis of what narcissism means. And again, one Prabhupada said in his very first purpose of ISKCON is to check the imbalance of values. And so we have this on one end an overdiagnosis, and then there's also kind of a turning a blind eye or an ignorance to it. And so as devotees, is this, I mean, I've heard some say that narcissists aren't likely to become devotees, or as devotees, a devotee has all good qualities. How do we as devotees, especially entering into such intimate relationships, such close interactions, have a balanced understanding of something like narcissism in terms of our Krishna consciousness and our devotional relationships?
I mean, the term narcissism is generally used by clinicians who work in the mental health space. It's only, because of social media and the rampant sharing of information and only little snippets of it, people become familiar with quite specialist terms and topics and fields without really knowing much about it. So I think to explain something like narcissism, we do need to come to it and approach it from a clinical approach before we approach it from a Krishna conscious approach. So we have to see it through the eyes of the context that it's usually used in, which is medical, psychological, healthcare, etc. So narcissism itself, when we're referring to the narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality disorder, the basis or the foundation of narcissism is that the person's sense of perception or self-identity, their sense of self-perception or self-identity is very, very much rooted in other people's perception of them. Okay, so we see it, whether it's social media, whether it's our communities, people are often trying to maintain a perception of perfection, because we're actually by nature we're perfect, right? So the perverted reflection is we keep trying to at least get people to perceive the imperfect, transient sense of who we are in a perfect way. The way people have filters on their videos or their photographs, or only send a snapshot of their best time of the day when they may be crying the other 23 hours and 59 minutes, So these are mild cases which are getting stronger and stronger of people protecting their sense of identity. With a narcissist, due to usually previous trauma, right? Or current trauma, their sense of who they are is so fragile. Their own sense of who they are is so fragile, and it's so dependent on other people's perception of who they are. They spend an awful lot of time creating that perception of perfection, because they're driven by this fear that if people find out who I actually am, then they won't accept me. And this leads to, and is accompanied by all sorts of challenges, and a variety of challenges. It can cause extreme anxiety in the person, depression, irritability, poor impulse control. They're often an explosive anger, especially when they feel that that perception of the ideal is compromised. So to make statements like, narcissists or those with narcissistic personality disorder won't ever become devotees or won't join a spiritual movement is false. First of all, there are, a small proportion, a very small proportion, I think only a couple of % of the population have full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. Many more have traits of narcissism, and each individual may dip into narcissistic type behavior depending on how vulnerable they are throughout their life. Everybody's vulnerable to that kind of creating a perception of perfection, right? That fragile ego. So first of all, there's not many people who have it, but many more people have traits. But secondly, I think it's important to remember that Srila Prabhupada created a movement which was a house that the whole world could live in, which means it's open to anybody, whether you have a diagnosis, don't have a diagnosis, whether you've stumbled upon Krishna consciousness out of curiosity, or whether you've approached it out of distress. And actually, one thing we do know is that those who have mental health challenges are overrepresented in religious communities of all faiths, because often when the world has turned its back, which it often has, on those who are mentally vulnerable and psychologically vulnerable, they will turn to God and they will turn to religious communities. So actually, on some level, we could say we may have an overrepresentation, and religious communities where the hierarchy is very steep, like we have in our community, where the goal of becoming Krishna conscious and how Krishna conscious someone isn't always obvious in their behavior. So people read it through position or status or the amount of activity somebody does. It can be a great breeding ground and hiding place for those people who have narcissistic traits or the personality disorder.
So, I mean, what I'm hearing is, okay, even though this isn't something that ordinarily is very common in the world, we shouldn't think ourselves immune to any particular clinical issue, be it narcissism or something else, simply because we are devotees.
Absolutely. Yeah. We are, a pure jiva, as Prabhupada tells us, housed in a body and a mind that is vulnerable to the modes, a body and a mind that's vulnerable to biological and timely deterioration, right? A body that is repeatedly assaulted by the environment. So it's inevitable then that there will be imbalances in this body and mind, in parallel with us developing and nourishing our spiritual identity.
And so, in terms of, that nourishment of our spiritual identity, it's very important that we be aware that there are these imbalances and that there is a propensity to be, it's one of the defects of the living entity is that, to be cheated, to be illusioned, that we don't, especially when considering, something as important as our life partner, as the person we're building a family with, to go into it with open eyes, with a balanced perception of who a person is, of what our expectations are.
Yes, and that's where we need communities who allow open dialogue without judgment. Because without judgment doesn't mean you just let anything happen. And hard judgment doesn't mean you're necessarily protecting people, right? What it means is when we have compassion and open dialogue without judgment, it means that we still discern, we can still value and assess what's good, what's bad, what's unhealthy, what's the best situation, and then seek to regain that balance. Anybody who's even in their individual life trying to create balance has to be able to evaluate what's working and what isn't, and set about, and a Krishna conscious person, actually a conscious person, sets about building the strengths and transforming the vulnerabilities. So pretending that these vulnerabilities aren't there because we misconstrue and think by saying that devotees are vulnerable, we're saying the process doesn't work. That's untrue. The process works. And part of the process working is stuff comes to the surface. And Krishna's kind and allows stuff to come to the surface so we can clear it.
This is the Narsha Nivriti.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have to be able to accept and face a problem before we can transform it. And whilst the soul is not vulnerable, whilst our spiritual self is not vulnerable to any of these things, our bodies and minds are. And we, because we are housed in these bodies and minds, and for the largest part of our spiritual life, we are, this body and mind is our instrument and vehicle for offering our service. It is important that it is optimized and that balance is regularly recalibrated, because what works for me now might not work in a year's time or in 5 years' time. Same. So our communities need to have this attitude with changing times, with changing social dynamics. We need to be open to changing in the service of others and ourselves.
And, this is, one of the points that you made in terms of qualities of the narcissist is this overemphasis on the perception, on the impression that other people have of them. And, very often, when there are challenges in relationships, a very common thing that we hear is, oh, but he's such a good devotee, he can't be abusive, or he can't be treating someone badly. Again, how do we maintain this balance in our understanding of individuals?
Okay. I don't want to just answer that question in the context of a narcissist.
Yes, of course.
I may draw on some examples. See, how do we measure what a good devotee is? Most of us measure whether someone's a good devotee based on our perception of what's most valuable in a good devotee. And often that does, unfortunately, especially when we're in the unsteady stages, or one is in, still very early kind of, especially prior to Nishtha, right? Haven't yet completed Anartha Nivritti. Very vulnerable to assessing a devotee's advancement based on things like position, things like progress, like external progress, how many projects there are, etc. So what they show, what somebody shows, and also what we're willing to see, and what we place value on. Some people will see a quiet person as, oh, that's a very valuable quality. This person's so meek and mild, they must be humble. Another person will see that, oh, this person's a closed book and guarded. I don't value people. I don't see that as a sign of spiritual advancement. I see somebody who's outspoken as a sign of. Do you see what I mean? So people will, when we don't know how to recognize someone's attachment and taste for the process and for the service of Guru and Krishna, we will use external parameters to judge their motives. So when somebody is already feeling fragile in their human self, they will spend an awful lot of time investing their energy in convincing others that they're a good devotee. But their own motive may be just that this validates me, whereas their own actual taste may not be so strong. So then when they come home and they have challenges maintaining that, because the people at home, they're the closest to you, right? In terms of they see all your habits. And part of serving your spouse, your partner, is to, help them transform some of those habits. But they cannot accept that because they feel, somebody perhaps with narcissistic traits or with a very fragile ego, because they're feeling vulnerable in their life, can't accept that. They find it very intolerable. They find it very difficult because they feel like their sense of identity has been compromised. And that's where they may lash out. That's why often people outside the home won't see that, unless it's very extreme cases where, and this is what I mean by narcissistic personality disorder, is unless they're humiliated outside, right? Then you'll often see a very rash reaction. Does that make sense? Why you can see one thing on the outside and another thing going on at home is, one is to do with the motives of the person who's covering up their activity. But the second thing is, really, how do we assess whether someone's a good devotee? And actually, Srila Rupa Goswami in Nectar of Instruction makes it very clear that there's 3 different levels of a pure devotee. You know, the Kanishta, the Madhyama, and the Uttam, they're all pure devotee because they're in the pursuit of pure devotional service. Different stages of a ripe mango. All stages have strengths, but the Kanishta has a lot of vulnerabilities, right? The ripe mango is sour. I mean, unripe mango is sour, isn't it? Whereas the ripest mango is sweet. But he says all should be respected. All should be respected. And one of the things I often see, and I also check in myself, really is, really the key thing we see with respect is how does it change from beginner to advanced devotee? We can make an assessment of our level of appreciation of others by looking at, when I hear about people's human activities, the activities that I don't necessarily understand, am I looking for a reason to criticize the person or to respect them? And as you see, as a person matures and advances, they are looking for reasons to respect others, not looking for reasons to disrespect. Right? But being respectful doesn't mean we ignore where there's work to do in ourselves or other people. But we respectfully and humbly offer the person our reflection, our insight, and if we really care about them, some method to change. Otherwise, it just ends up being criticism. Does that answer your question?
I mean, I think you've said a lot, and I think I think a point that I keep coming back to is this concept of balance and calibration. So in the connection between the family and the community, it's really important that we calibrate our understanding of who a good devotee is, and so that we can help both ourselves and those around us move progress in devotional service.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see someone struggling for whatever reason to be able to uphold the highest standards, because we have a proper calibration, we're able to help.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if we don't calibrate ourselves correctly, we're not going to be able to help.
Yes, absolutely. But also the person's got to be willing to receive the help. That's important. But where there's healthy relationships, people will usually receive from us. But yes, this calibration thing is a piece of self-work, right? Something we need to do for ourselves. When we talk about ISKCON, each person in ISKCON is ISKCON. ISKCON is not a separate organization to each of us individuals that make it up. It's made up of, it's a sum of all of us, right? So when we say ISKCON's like this, ISKCON's like that, okay, but I'm part of ISKCON. So if I start changing, then the entire movement will start changing. Because as soon as you change one piece in the puzzle, the whole puzzle looks different. No?
Yeah, and sometimes so a piece may appear to fit somewhere, but it doesn't actually, when you look at the picture, it doesn't actually fit. So there requires that added layer of discernment, to understand where does this piece really fit, and so that you can build the whole piece, the whole puzzle correctly. And as individuals and as individual families and as communities, we all fit together. And so I'm just thinking, in terms of things that Prabhupada has said, things that Prabhupada has given us. We often hear Bhagavad Gita. A devotee should be considered saintly even if he commits the most abominable activities. Again, balancing with this concept that they are defects that we have to go through in our nivritti. And how do we then use that balance in building our safe communities?
Srila Prabhupada invested a lot of his heart, soul, body, actually his full self in his books and his lectures and everything, interviews, where people will often quote things like what you've just said and may quote them to justify difficult behavior, challenging behavior. But if we read Srila Prabhupada's statements in their full context, you will get the full answer to these questions, right? You'll get the full answer, because in that same purport where that verse is, Srila Prabhupada says he is referring to, that Krishna is referring to accidental, abominable actions, not repeated, intentional, abominable actions. Okay? And saintly people can make mistakes, because the human side of a person is always going to be open to error, open to illusion.
It's again one of the 4 defects of the conditioned soul is to make mistakes.
Actually, it's the 4 defects of the human body and mind, because even a soul who is not conditioned is still housed in a body and mind that is affected by the modes of material nature. Krishna says very clearly in the 18th chapter that there isn't anyone in all 3 worlds who's not affected by the modes. Now, there is a difference between being affected by the modes and being controlled by the modes. So the more advanced someone is, the less controlled they are by the modes, the less their bhakti is controlled by their modes. And so then their saintly qualities are more apparent, right? But their body and mind still gets affected by, in terms of, the body still needs sleep. The mind is still, vulnerable to nutritional defects. This is why pure devotees can also get sick, get cancer, get heart disease, etc. So I think it's important to remember these things. These are not a reason to disrespect someone. Even if we know that somebody's done something abominable, even if we know that it's not accidental and they're doing it repeatedly, our respect can be expressed by confronting them and getting them help. That's respectful. It's compassionate.
That actually leads me into my next point of, we're again balancing being respectful and accountability. And how do we hold people accountable respectfully?
Where we care for others, respect naturally follows. We can value all the amazing input, all the amazing things that they've done, and we can help them to make their contribution even better. It's just like a parent with their child. Prabhupada often talks about parental love being the closest to unconditional, especially when children are small, right? That parental mood is, I see everything you contribute and I see where you need to develop. So my respect for you, born out of love, allows me to not judge you on the mistakes you've made, but offer you some way to reform and change.
Okay. Just to kind of slightly change direction, but again with this point of being introspective and also being honest with ourselves and within our communities. There's also this misconception, not in my house, or this happens in other places. Abuse doesn't happen in my community, in my culture, it's someone else's problem. But as you say, there isn't a single person or a single living entity that isn't affected by the modes of nature. So again, how do we consider, how do we recalibrate on this concept?
It's distressing to know that there's distressing things going on in the world. Even hearing the news for a lot of people is traumatizing. We don't have to be living the experience to get traumatized by it. Even hearing about it is traumatic. And so there are always going to be people who don't have an appetite to know the difficult things that other people go through. There are going to always be people who aren't psychologically minded. There are going to be people who aren't politically minded. And somebody who's very politically minded will be like, oh, why aren't you interested in politics? There are going to be people who are health conscious and those who aren't health conscious. So there are some people who are going to be, following the 16 days of activism talks very keenly because they are interested in these subjects. I would say to those who aren't interested in these subjects or don't feel like it's alive and present in their life or in the lives of people around them, that the one reason it can be very helpful to be aware of what's going on around us and why and where from these misconceptions arise from, whether it's social parameters or scriptural quotes, whatever somebody's using to justify their mistreatment of others. those same things that are misconstrued, you may not be misconstruing it and taking it in the wrong way. The people around you might not be. But when it's there in the ether and being used like that and not addressed and not clarified, when the misconception is not clarified, those seeds are still being planted. And it may not affect your immediate generation, but it may affect the next generation, because every seed leads to a plant if it's watered. So there's, we don't want people to suddenly become super cautious and scared of, oh my God, this could happen to me and what can I do to protect myself? But just aware. We don't have famine in the countries where most of us are listening, right? The word famine is alien to us. The experience of famine is alien to us. If anything, there's a wastage of food in most of the countries that people are in, that who are listening to this session. But being aware of what leads to famine can help us to be more compassionate to those who are going through it, and can help us to prevent famine in our communities in the future. So this idea that, oh, it doesn't happen in our community or hasn't happened to anyone around me, feel blessed and grateful. But being aware can be very empowering.
So it's this the point of awareness that, I mean, it's not that, we want people to live in a state of fear, but, just the fact that we live in this material world, that there are dangers, that there are pitfalls that result from just the modes of nature in this material world. We need to be aware that, some of these things may happen. And when we do see something happen, we have the opportunity as an extended family or as a community to show up as Vaishnavas and provide that support.
Yes, but each person is going to also be more inclined, and some are going to be scared of showing up as Vaishnavas, because, we have for all the classes we have on humility, many have a very poor understanding of humility. The understanding of humility is still very much based on external behavior. I've had leaders who won't address issues with people, saying, I'm going to take the humble position. Actually, your position is to protect other people, not be too worried about what other people think of you, right? Otherwise, how will you protect? But again, coming back to that selfless love, if you really love someone, I'm more interested in benefiting you than I am in your opinion of me. And it's very hard for people to separate themselves from that. The other thing I think is important to bear in mind is people often mean well, but we judge people's actions based on where we come from. I've seen plenty of, if I think back to the devotees who've tried to raise challenges they're having with domestic abuse in their home with their mentors or leaders, the mentors and leaders may not be trying to bury their head in the sand. They may be just judging or assessing things through their eyes of good intention. And so they just assume that the other person in the relationship also is trying to do things with good intention. This is why it's important to understand that there are disorders, that people do have difficulties, that when people go through certain life experiences, unless they've already had help with it, they tend to carry it with them. We carry our home with us everywhere. Nobody actually ever leaves their home. What we've developed, the impressions we've developed whilst we were growing up, we carry them with us everywhere. They're programmed into our mind. Mind's like a hard drive, right? Carrying pre-programmed things that subtly, seep into our conscious mind and we act on.
And okay, this concept of programming and the, our understanding of humility. So obviously being in, Prabhupada often said that, women are naturally more submissive, or the feminine nature is described in a particular way. And combined with this concept of taking the humble position, how do we again maintain this balance of this is my fault, and I take responsibility for this, and this is an imbalance of values. We've heard again statements made by Prabhupada saying if there's a problem in a marriage, it's always the woman's fault. But how do we balance this? How do we understand the proper context?
When I often hear quotes like what you're saying, people misquote. They'll use words like always and only, when Prabhupada hasn't used always and only. He often just says some or often, right? When he talks about women's submissive nature and their natural propensity to serve, he also says the male masculine nature has the propensity to lord it over others, right? And to control. So this, when Prabhupada talks about, a woman should, so for example, I was reading something the other day where Prabhupada was talking about how a woman should understand the nature of her husband, and by understanding his nature, cooperate with him. Equally, he talks about how the husband should care for and protect and nourish his wife. Why? Why are we doing these things? In the pursuit of actually going back to being selfless, loving servants. Back to Bhaktisiddhanta Swami's, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's, very beautiful description. Actually, we're trying to become unconditionally loving servants of each other and the Lord, because that's what pleases Krishna. So we understand the psyche or the propensities and vulnerabilities of each of the bodies and minds we inhabit, which are going to be varied, because there are going to be women who have strongly developed masculine and feminine energy, and there are going to be men who have strongly developed feminine and masculine energy, because we're all trying to become balanced, right? But the masculine and feminine is there in everyone. So when we read, what I really encourage people to do is, on the internet, everything's shorthand. Everything's shorthand. You get a tiny little quote and you get nothing else. Everybody wants a shortcut to Bhagavatam, a shortcut to Gita, a shortcut to becoming a pure devotee. And so little quotes are used to either bring someone down or to raise the philosophy up. And I would say be very careful when you're reading websites where these phrases, like Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada said that, especially when they're there to strengthen and give definition to what a woman is like, what a man is like, or any particular varna or ashram, because people will use their biases to only select certain things. So there's three things that I really just, in this regard, to kind of bring some more context to our discussion about debunking myths, understanding Srila Prabhupada's difficult statements, is three things. First of all, context is so important. Prabhupada will relate to things depending on what context he's speaking about, but depending on the context of the pastime, depending on the context of which audience he's speaking to. If he was an intelligent person, his main point is give your life to Krishna. Give your life to Krishna and love and respect each other. That is the heartbeat of all of his books. Give your life to Krishna in a loving and respectful, harmonious way. Everything else is there to give this very simple and basic and beautiful point, depending on time, place, and circumstance. So when you read these things, how do we balance them? First of all, look at the context. Secondly, look at the source, because when Prabhupada quotes people, if he's giving a social parameter, he may quote someone who's an expert from his time on the social circumstances and psychological circumstances, right? Psychological arena. Look at what time, place, and circumstance Prabhupada speaks to. Who's he speaking to? Equally, Prabhupada, he, if you want to know what Prabhupada says about domestic abuse, he actually said, I've got a quote here exactly. Any man, Prabhupada said to somebody who addressed domestic abuse with him, he said, any man who beats his wife is a dog and she should leave him. Okay, so you're asking me these questions in the context of safer families. How do we balance things? First of all, look at the context. Secondly, look at the whole picture. What is Srila Prabhupada giving us, if you look at the full picture of all of these books, which is why we need to read all of these books and not rely on internet little short video clips. People have moved from listening to 2-hour lectures to listening to their daily digest of 2-minute podcasts, on the Bhagavatam. So look at the whole picture. Take Prabhupada's statements in the entirety of everything he's giving us. And then last but not least, each of us as an individual has our own agency, our locus of control. If I hear something, if I read something, it's up to me what I do with it. So when we hear statements like, okay, a feminine nature is submissive, the masculine nature is to lord it over. That feminine nature and masculine nature is there both in men and women. In a relationship of man and woman who are serving together, the community, Lord Krishna and their gurus, how do they flex and move their service attitude and their attitude to be decisive and be forthright and make decisions in such a way that's beneficial for them, for their families, and for the community around them? Because a mum, a mother, a woman, yes, she has a nurturing side, but she also has to draw on her masculine protective side for her children. Okay, she absolutely has to do that. Let's take another, verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is from Canto 5, Chapter 5, verse 18. One who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. Now, you think about being a woman in this context where you're saying, balancing that mood of submissiveness with being forthright. A mother, mothers are females. A mother is somebody who, is in a female psyche, female body, which has a propensity to serve. You can deliver your dependence in the mood of service. It doesn't mean you take away from that. Am I making sense?
Yeah, the most important thing is context, and also is to have discernment that, what is the, when, okay, we read something, we may sometimes, read an entire purport and we have the whole context. Okay, this is everything that Prabhupada said, but, to have some discernment in how these things apply practically. And then obviously to root every single thing. The greatest context is that we're aspiring Vaishnavas. We are servants of the servant. And is the understanding that I'm drawing from this statement, helping me become a better Vaishnava, or is it taking me away? Because ultimately, Prabhupada, as a pure devotee, that is his only goal, is to help us become better Vaishnavas.
Absolutely. Prabhupada didn't come to solve social problems temporarily. He came to solve them permanently. He didn't come to solve psychological problems temporarily. He came to solve them permanently. He didn't come to solve our financial problems temporarily. He came to solve them permanently. Do you see what I mean? So I absolutely agree with you. This we can all ask ourselves a question when we're reading or hearing anything. Is the way I'm taking this going to help my Krishna consciousness? Is it going to help another person's Krishna consciousness? Or is it going to harm me or harm another person? And if we can approach everything with this mood, because there's always going to be competing principles. Always. It's just like the modes compete, so our intellect has competing principles. And there'll be some things which might be true for our Varna, but actually for our Krishna consciousness, they're not helpful. There may be some things which are okay for our ashram, but in a particular context may not be helpful for our Krishna consciousness. So we have to look at them on balance. There's always going to be competing principles. Now, we often talk about Shastra and realization as revelatory, right? The more Krishna conscious we become, we see different things in scripture. But this is why we have mentors, gurus, heroes, friends, fans. We have these different types of relationships, and healthy people in healthy communities have relationships on all levels and are open to hearing from all levels. And the minute you shut down, oh, okay, I'm only going to hear from my peers, or I'm only going to hear from my seniors. Oh, I'm only going to hear from my juniors because they give things to me in a palatable way. We are putting up blinkers in different areas of our lives. So yes, this question, this vetting that you've given, that you've mentioned, that is this going to be beneficial for my Krishna consciousness or not? And is this going to harm or hurt another person? It is a very important question to answer.
I mean, I find, in everything that you're saying, something that really, I'm trying to grapple with is, again, this balance between, I mean, you talked about what may be, it's in my nature, in my varna, but not good for my Krishna consciousness. And then also applying proper discernment to how we interpret Shastra. And, a very common pastime that we hear about is Chavana Muni and Sukanya.
Mm-hmm.
And where despite Sukanya's, her feminine nature is glorified, but not just, I would say it's not just her feminine nature, but her Vaishnava nature. And in applying this to our daily lives, it could be also felt that I need to protect my boundary, that I actually don't feel safe, or yes, I have respect for this person, but currently this behavior is not helpful to me, or I feel harmed. How do we balance this ideal that we're given and putting it into a practical everyday scenario?
I think because we are talking about this context of safer families and domestic abuse, and actually it's probably the primary way that abuse continues, even in relationships where the person being abused is intelligent and, self-sufficient. Self-sufficient, intelligent people also get abused because the abuser manipulates the person, usually psychologically, in not being able to recognize balance and boundaries by placing the blame on that individual. So often, and what's taken advantage of is the person's ability to self-reflect. So they play on that. Okay, well, you need to do some self-reflection on what you've done to trigger me to behave in XYZ behavior. So this is, again, where a person who's in an abusive relationship has lost that ability to see boundaries, has lost that ability to separate where's my sense of responsibility and where is the space and time, and when is it time to go, actually, that is your responsibility. For example, people often go, oh, but if I do this, it'll make him feel bad. Or if I do this, it'll make her feel bad. Okay, I'm sorry, that other person's feelings are their responsibility. We all have agency over our own feelings. When did we become people who went, okay, how I feel depends on you, right? So that's where safer families and safe communities depend on each other. Where somebody else has lost their ability to tell where's my sense of responsibility and the other person's, and where's the boundary, we can be supportive friends, mentors, guides, to be able to point out, actually, that is not your responsibility. And your attitude, your service attitude is being played upon for something that's harmful for your mental health and for your spiritual health and for the health of your children and the rest of this community. Because if you think about it, domestic abuse doesn't just affect the family it's happening in, because each of those individuals are connected to so many other individuals, and every individual they're connected with is affected by those individuals' consciousness. The children of those families go on to be community members, go on to be parents themselves, go on to be leaders sometimes, go on to take on all sorts of different types of roles, carrying this inability to tell right from wrong, healthy from unhealthy, and blurred boundaries. So domestic abuse is everybody's business. And where we see somebody's lost the ability to discern, we may need to step up and be that voice of discernment.
I mean, because actually you raised so many important points there. One particular point is, you brought up, our service attitude. And, and previously you were talking about humility. And we can, again, I guess, in the imbalance, go too much and to say, I must be the servant. And, we hear things like the woman must have provoked the man. She must take responsibility, or it's the woman's responsibility to hold the family together. And, in this desire to be the servant, to be humble, to fulfill this ideal, we, I think you have explained some of this where, you've lost sight of boundaries. But, could you go a little bit more into, that recalibration of understanding that I am actually I'm going in the wrong direction, that this isn't actually being a good servant. This isn't developing humility.
Humility requires bravery to see that the right thing's done. If you, and this might sound harsh to some people, but often people will stay in an abusive relationship because they love the other person. Or they very strongly feel they love the other person. And I don't want to get into the cycle of abuse dynamics, because maybe other talks have covered it, about how that feeling of, being in love is constantly perpetuated by the abuser immediately after an abusive incident. But what I do want to speak to is that, so in being humble, if this whole thing of I love this person, if you love them, why are you allowing them to commit Vaishnava aparadh? We can stop someone from abusing us in their best interest, even if somebody's convinced you it's all your fault, but the actions they're performing are not in their best interest. So even if you very strongly feel I'm the trigger, I'm the cause, and your mind has been completely manipulated in that mindset, you can actually stop and say, well, hang on a minute, but the behaviors this person is exhibiting, they are very clearly there when you look at Vaishnava aparadh, to hurt or harm a Vaishnav, to criticize them, to kill a Vaishnav or threaten a Vaishnav. All of these there are in terms of Vaishnava aparadh. How can I be humble and protect this person from doing harmful behaviors, things that are harming their own mental health, their own spiritual creeper? I need to do something about this because I actually love this person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And that also leads me to another point of, this concept of bravery. And as you mentioned, the impact on those around us and being brave enough to protect those around us. And obviously we're talking about a family. So, I mean, there's also, there is kind of this misconception, or we may hear that even though someone may be abusing their spouse, they could still be a good parent. People still love their children. And it's better that, other children may not be affected by the dynamic between the parents, which is something you have touched on quite a bit already, that there's these seeds.
I don't think you have to be a psychiatrist to see that children are affected by the way their parents interact with each other. The home is supposed to be a safe place, and children, the child's first guru is the mother. The mother gives the children their first idea of what the world is like. And as children, we know how we feel about our mothers, what our mothers have given us. If we see the person who's protecting us, who nurtures us, unsafe, the home stops feeling safe. And then children end up developing a dynamic where they feel they have to protect their parent. And this really interferes with the children's own confidence, their own sense of self-esteem, their ability to develop into free, self-sufficient, independent. When I say independent, and Prabhupada talks about independence like this as well. When he talks about independence, he's not talking about some rogue person who just does whatever they want. He's talking about somebody who's independent, somebody who has autonomy and can make decisions for themselves, right? And feel safe in making decisions for themselves. Children who grow up in an environment where they constantly feel like they have to protect one of their parents find it very difficult to develop healthy agency and autonomy without help. So actually, even if the person being abused, whether it's the husband or the wife, more commonly it's the wife, feels like, oh, but he's such a good father. A good father to what end? Because when a child sees that he's not a good husband, that is damaging. Because we learn from our parents how men and women interact, what the dynamic should be. Should it be cooperative? And it can. I mean, there's a list of things I can rattle off and ways in which children are affected by domestic abuse. Children actually are even affected when they don't see what's going on. Just even because children are very sensitive. They don't have as much heavy conditioning. They're very sensitive. They pick up the attitudes in the house. And the thing is, when they hear things and they're already feeling unsafe, if they can't see what's actually going on, they imagine what's going on. And often their imagination and their fears paint a picture that's far worse than what's actually happening. Or they start normalizing it, that this is what life is like in a normal household, which then means when they grow up as adults, they attract that. And if it happens to them, they don't recognize it as a problem.
And I mean, this could then also, lead into other relationships where you don't have boundaries with, not just, your intimate partner, but with other people in your life. You tolerate mistreatment from bosses, colleagues, friends, even.
Absolutely.
It just feeds that cycle of, unhealthy patterns, which ultimately is not what Prabhupada wants for us. It's not what Krishna wants for us.
Our first authorities are our parents. Our relationship with our parents sets up our dynamic with authority for the majority of the rest of our life. And so this is why people can often even struggle to recognize issues in the guru-disciple relationship from both sides.
So, what I'm hearing is that it is extremely important that we understand what healthy boundaries in Krishna consciousness means. And sometimes this may mean taking action to protect a person from committing aparadh. Now, this may mean leaving the situation as a woman, or taking your children and leaving. Now, we've also heard very often Prabhupada speak very critically of divorce, that it's, and he's also, often the woman is blamed again for the divorce, for the problem, whether, even in many societies, it's seen as somehow a failure of this woman. And, there's also, again, with the greater social dynamics, socioeconomic dynamics, it's better to have two incomes, or, a whole lot of things that may go through a person's mind. How do we, again, go back to that point of bravery? Humility requires bravery, that, this is not a healthy situation for me or for my children, and I need to be able to get out of this. And it doesn't make me a failure as a woman. It doesn't make me a failure as a devotee for doing this.
Coming back to Prabhupada's statements on opinions on divorce, actually, if you really read his statements on divorce, he was opposed to men and women frivolously breaking up. Often his comments revolved around how, people for very small reasons, which are usually based on their sexual appetite or finances, will end a relationship. Or they fear marriage, and so they just live together as friends. He would often critique that aspect of especially Western culture. And he would also speak to how this culture of men abandoning women leaves them unprotected and having to rely on themselves entirely, and finding some way to protect themselves. And I remember reading last night something very clear that Prabhupada said, that he said, women shouldn't be left in a position where they become unchaste in the pursuit of protection. And particularly at the political time when he was writing his books, there was a strong thing of welfare for women who are single mothers, etc. And I remember when I was growing up, we didn't have many teenage pregnancies when I was growing up, but the odd case that we had, their comments were, and I heard these comments increasing as I got older and I heard about more teenage pregnancies, was that, oh, it's okay, I'm just going to have a baby because the government will give me a flat. You see what I mean? So this is what Prabhupada was trying to protect society from. He's saying it's an embarrassment that a man will, for frivolous reasons, leave a woman, for example, finances or sex, and or lack of thereof, and the woman's then left to feeling like she has to compromise her chastity in the pursuit of protection, right? In the pursuit of, and when we talk about this whole idea of protection, Prabhupada repeatedly talks about what is being protected, right? What is being protected? He talks about 4 classes, right? He talks about women, children, elderly, and Brahmins. Prabhupada was an old man. He many times says, I'm an old man, I need protection. Look how much looking after I need. You don't protect something because it's weak and broken. Look at the objects, your weak and broken objects. Nobody puts a padlock on them. Nobody puts them in a safe. What do you protect? You protect your most valuable items. And one of the things Prabhupada repeatedly draws attention to, and especially when he's talking about, for example, when he talks about Draupadi and the killing of her sons, that women have a natural propensity to serve. Women have a natural propensity to forgive. Okay? And because women have a natural propensity to serve and to forgive, this is easily exploited. So actually, whether it's a father protecting, a husband protecting, a son protecting, or a brother protecting, you're protecting a woman from being, her good nature being exploited. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which is, I mean, that actually is very interesting because, again, this imbalance in the way these concepts are presented, where it's, the protection of women maintains the chastity of society by which we get a good generation for peace, tranquility, and progress, from Bhagavatam, and, that a woman by nature endowed with many artistic talents, tendencies. From the Vedic age, we find high-grade women and girls were highly qualified with 64 arts. It's, Prabhupada is glorifying the value of women, the value that this chastity brings. But at the same time, we very often hear this concept that women should be controlled. Like the Prabhupada has made statements where the activities of the woman should be controlled by the husband. Women should not be given freedom like children. And where do we balance? Because there's also statements where Prabhupada says a wife is not your slave, but the concept of in the name of protecting the chastity of society, women should be controlled like a slave. Like it feels out of context, but at the same time, it's just like it's very hard for me to process.
Again, competing principles. So two things. One is these statements about women. Prabhupada, when he talks about men and women, he's talking about the psyche and physical propensities of men and women and conditioned men and women. Okay. Yeah. Then he's also actually primarily giving us, actually, a Vaishnava can, to the degree that they're Krishna conscious, rise above their vulnerabilities. They're no longer held back by those vulnerabilities or manipulated by those vulnerabilities or go on an ego trip because of their strengths. Okay. So given that we are actually here talking about, safer families in the context of a Vaishnava community, when we're talking about the conditioning, masculine and feminine conditioning, you absolutely have to keep coming back to this principle of service. And an easier example and comparison is given with children. We talk about children giving children freedom. Actually, children grow and evolve. And as your child grows and evolves, you understand that the child has developed and changed, right? And any parent who wants to get on with their child and have a good human and devotional relationship with their child has to understand that in the service of my child, I have to change the way I communicate and parent them in order for them to continue to allow me to protect them. When my teenage daughter was small, simply saying, don't do that was enough. As a teenager, I have to qualify it. I have to explain it and to some degree respect her own agency and choice. Then I'm allowed to protect. So similarly, a woman automatically, come on, we know this from a feminine psyche. Even men who have a very feminine psyche will automatically, where they feel this is a safe space, even men who are masculine, when they feel safe, so it's not a man-woman thing, human psychology, we feel safe somewhere, we open up. We very freely say, yeah, I'm actually happy to take guidance from you. So this is what none of us have, sorry, but nobody has freedom. Even men don't have freedom. Everybody's dependent on somebody, often dependent on many people. Men are also dependent on women. They're born from women. They're dependent on their mothers, right? They're dependent on their sisters, their wives. They're dependent on their daughters. So we are all dependent on someone. So none of us have freedom, especially not in our human nature. So it is important that we become interdependent. And interdependence is create safe families of interdependence where we willingly allow others to protect us because we feel safe. Look at Prabhupada's daughters. They would do anything for him because he made them feel safe.
I mean, there's the pastime with Malati, for where she was serving Prabhupada and his sannyas godbrothers. And, Prabhupada said she would slit her throat for me and I would slit my throat for her.
Yes. Yes. Mutual love and respect.
I mean, Prabhupada, Prabhupada, even again, there's so many statements that, people take of Prabhupada, but there's so much that he says, where even in Bhagavatam, in fourth canto, Prabhupada says in a purport, the king will respect all women as if they were his own mother, and he will treat his wife as the other half of his body.
Yes.
This concept of, I mean, it would be insane if I were to be hitting myself and bruising myself, but I mean, also Prabhupada also says, as a fort commander, very easily conquers an invading plunderers. By taking shelter of a wife, one can conquer the senses, which are unconquerable in other social orders. So that, this concept of, as a Vaishnav, that, just because you're protection doesn't mean that this person has no value. That as you say, interdependency, the wife is actually protecting the husband as well.
Yes, absolutely. I remember one devotee saying, I thanked her because her husband's doing a service where he's in the public eye a lot. He's is exposed to a lot of beautiful women, and I thanked her, and she said, "Well, I don't do anything." I said, "No, you love him; it protects him, right? Because love feels safe. Fame, adoration, then they're a very unsafe place, right? So this mutual respect, this mutual love, this mutual protection, men also need protecting."
And there's a misconception, as a basic human need, that attention means attraction, attention means care, and when we don't have that healthy sense of love and safety, we can be misled. Whether you're a man or a woman, it can be easily misled, and that can lead you into all sorts of dangerous situations.
So it all comes down to motive. This is the thing, motive. The only person who really can check your motive is you, right? What's your purpose? We each have to ask ourselves, what is my purpose for what I'm about to do? And it feels uncomfortable to own up to, my purpose feels a little bit mixed right now. Okay, it's mixed, but is it going to exploit anyone? Is it going to hurt anyone? Right? Sometimes with the best of intentions, we hurt people anyway by accident. But accidental things don't happen again. We learn from those things, but repeated, intentional. We're sitting here talking about Prabhupada's perhaps difficult or confusing statements, but people don't talk about very clear statements. Prabhupada very clearly talks about, this is not even Prabhupada, this is the Bhagavatam. I'm going to share another verse here, because if anybody's still confused as to whether it's domestic abuse is okay for devotees, this is Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, Verse 5. The clever Duryodhana and his party cunningly usurped the kingdom of Yudhishthira, who had no enemy. By the grace of the Lord, the recovery was executed, and the unscrupulous kings who joined with Duryodhana were killed by him. Others also died, their duration of life having decreased for their rough handling of the hair of Queen Draupadi. Prabhupada many times talks about, and Shastra, Krishna also, both of them are very strongly saying, you mistreat a woman, you deserve to be killed. I mean, we're not even talking about capital punishment here. We're saying get some space, get safe, and get the abuser some help.
I mean, even in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada says the reason why Bhishma and Dronacharya had to be killed on the battlefield was that they were silent when Draupadi was assaulted. So simply being silent, Prabhupada takes such a heavy stance of capital punishment. And so as a community, as people who are meant to be serving each other, this service of protecting someone is, it's really important.
Very important. I'm going to address something that I don't know if it's been spoken about. Sometimes I see a reluctance in devotees to support families where there's domestic abuse, because of the aftermath can be quite complicated, because abusive people often get more nasty if the person tries to leave. And often people won't leave, a woman won't leave because she knows, if I try to leave, things are going to get worse before they get better. This person's not going to react well, okay? Because this whole idea of abuse is I own you, right? The person's been objectified. And the Saraswati chakra is very clear that, you know, as husband and wife, you don't own each other. Even parents who think they own their children, children will leave you, right? Or it turns into an abusive relationship. So I think it's really important to move away from this idea of ownership and fear that somebody who owns you is going to harm you even more if you try to leave them. Be aware of it, but when we let it control us, it actually increases the abuser's confidence with their method of abuse, because it works. You're repeatedly conditioning them to believe that, oh, actually, I get what I want by being aggressive. Do you see what I mean? And then families who might be able to support you. So I think our community can each ask themselves, you know, if you know someone who's in an abusive situation, is fear of getting entangled in the abuser's toxic behavior holding you back from supporting? If you can be honest with yourself about that, then you can find intelligent ways to still support the victim.
Yeah, because there is this misconception that it's easy for a victim to leave. Oh, if she wanted to, she could get out. She likes being abused.
If you don't recognize abuse, you're not going to leave it. If you don't recognize it as an abusive situation, why would you leave? If you think it's your fault, you don't leave.
And even if you do recognize it's abuse, there's that fear. Because actually, even, you know, police will tell you the most dangerous time is when the woman tries to leave.
Yep. And women will wait, or an abused person will wait at least, there will be, the average is 20 occasions of abuse before somebody speaks up. By then, the damage is done in terms of the person taking responsibility. This is in all types of abuse, even in sexual abuse. Many people will not speak up against their abuser because they've been so convinced it's their fault.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, there's actually a quote from Prabhupada in a lecture from March 1972 where he says, "We belong to Krishna. My body belongs to Krishna." And we talk about property of ownership. Krishna, we belong to Krishna. And we mark our bodies with tilak because this is, you know, Krishna's temple. Krishna is in our heart. You would never go and vandalize the temple, vandalize the altar. So why do you think it's okay to vandalize this temple of Krishna?
Mm-hmm. Very nice.
This body belongs to Krishna and it should be handled with care.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
But I mean, we could go on for a lot longer on this topic. But we are, you know, I appreciate the time you've taken and the insights that you've shared. And okay, all right. So, you know, just to wrap up, okay, we opened this conversation with the principle of what does it mean to see your spouse as a Vaishnava, and you know, throughout the conversation, you know, through various points, we've brought up the concept of maintaining balance. And in the way we read Prabhupada's words, in the way we approach our Krishna consciousness, is there, you know, if there's one thing that you could say to a person, you know, in terms of maintaining, you know, how to maintain that compass within themselves, what would you say?
Our compass is informed by what we hear. One of the key ways that domestic abuse is propagated in a family is that the person is isolated from other people who could inform their compass in a more healthy way. If I can give advice in terms of how do we keep our communities and our families safe, is please, as an individual, no matter what you might be being told at home, as an offering to Guru and Krishna. If you can't do it for yourself, as an offering to Guru and Krishna, make sure that your compass is informed by discerning what and who you hear from, in the pursuit of safer families, safer communities, in the service of Guru and Krishna, and in the pursuance of our spiritual life. We want to have healthy bodies, healthy minds, healthy communities, healthy families, so that actually achieving our spiritual peak becomes easier. Anartha Nivritti is difficult enough as it is. We don't have to make it harder by putting overlays of repeated cycles of offense. And domestic abuse is offensive.
And I mean, on that point, I just, want to wrap up with a quote from Srila Prabhupada. This body belongs to Krishna, and therefore we must always keep it in a healthy condition to the best of our ability.
Hare Krishna.
So thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. And I hope our listeners will join us for our other panels, and we will also leave in the link below how you can you can follow Citi-Sakti and get in touch if they want to. Right. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare